your most recent book's a collection of essays called "Don't Be a Feminist,"
Mm-hmm.
and the implied you in that sentence is your daughter.
That's right.
Right. So maybe to start with, can you define feminism for me? I often hear people say that feminism is simply the idea that men and women should be treated equally. But that doesn't seem to cover many of the ways in which the word's used in the real world. So where do you land on that?
Good. Yeah, yes, that's a very good place to start. Let's look at how the word is actually used. It's true that many feminists try to claim this, but then there's the puzzle. Look, over half the population denies being a feminist. Do you think over half the population believes that men and women should not be treated equally? Do you think that over half the population believes in sexism? Where do you find people who say such things? In fact, I find survey evidence that about 95% of Americans say that they believe that men and women should be treated equally, politically, socially, and economically. So this is a ridiculously unfair definition where feminists are basically just trying to define their view as, I just believe in being fair to people. That's what my view is. It's like calling your newspaper Pravda, meaning truth. It's like the fact that your newspaper's called Truth doesn't make it so. And if you then go and say anyone who disagrees with my newspaper doesn't believe in truth, that, well, that was kind of the point of labeling it that, but it's not a trick that any adult should fall for. So what I do at the beginning is say, all right, well, what is feminism? And here's the thing, I think we should try to come up with a definition that actually distinguishes feminists from non-feminists in a way that both groups could accept as being a fair description of their view. All right, now, it's hard to do this, but I still think that I've done a way better job than almost all feminists have, where I say, look, feminism is the view that our society generally treats men more fairly than women. The end. It doesn't require that you think that our society treats men much more favorably. It doesn't require that you think that all men are treated fairly and all women are treated unfairly. It just says that you believe that there is a difference in the fairness that our society accords to the genders that is worth noting and that is in men's favor. Right? And this fits not only the way the word is normally used. If you imagine someone saying, I'm a feminist and I think that our society treats women fantastically, I'm completely satisfied. Right? You're just like, really? That's odd. Or on the other hand, if you imagine someone saying, like I'm not a feminist and I believe that, what would it be? Someone says I'm not a feminist and I think that it's just terrible the way that we're treating women and like where our society is just super unfair. It's like, that doesn't sound like someone who's not a feminist. Someone who's not a feminist, they might just disbelieve it. They might be agnostic. They might be someone who thinks that men are treated more unfairly. But say what all people who deny being feminists have in common, or almost all, is just saying, like, it's not really true that our society treats men more fairly than women overall. Right? So that is just the definitional point. I mean, this is one where everyone wants to argue about it, even though I'll just say, look, like the other definitions are just grossly unfair to all non-feminists, obviously. Like you are ascribing a view to non-feminists that almost none of them hold. How can you keep doing this to people? It's just not right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, let's say that we assume that feminists are correct in their analysis about the ways in which society is stacked against women.
Yes. In particular, that feminism, that we take my definition and then say, let's assume that it's correct. Yes.
Yeah. So, let's say like maybe we do live in a rape culture to some extent where women make less than men for the same work. And I know both of those could be challenged. So if they're correct about these kinds of problems, would you be, so that maybe the other part of it, when I think about feminism is their kinds of solutions that they tend to propose, right? So would you be a feminist in terms of sort of their solution? So in other words, do you see their approach to these problems as likely to produce positive change in the world, or is it more likely to produce like a sense of hopelessness, aggrievement, victimhood, those sort of things?
Well, it's complicated. I mean, if you just had a system saying that women have to get half of all the good jobs, for example, on the one hand, that means that women customers are going to have to go and patronize a bunch of underqualified workers. On the other hand, it does mean that women might get those jobs. And so what the net effect for women would be for that would be unclear. So while I'm very open to the idea of feminist policies are bad for women, it's one where I'll say maybe, but I'd be more inclined just to argue, is it even true that the problem you're trying to correct is a genuine problem? Is it really true that women are being treated very unfairly in the labor market? or are they rather being treated very fairly, or maybe even more than fairly? So those are some of the questions that I think about. I mean, there is this strain of libertarian feminism, which I don't think is a contradiction in terms. You could believe that our society treats women unfairly, but then say that the free market is the best way of solving it and that government makes problems worse. That's a logically coherent view. What is striking to me is that when I've actually argued with libertarian feminists, they rarely even say that. Instead, mostly they just repeat a bunch of standard complaints about markets mistreating women. It's like, I mean, I'm a little puzzled by this view then. So, like, if you think that markets without sexual harassment laws would have rampant sexual harassment, why exactly are you a libertarian about it?
Yeah, it seems that a lot of these issues, whether it's feminism or anti-racism, there's this sort of sense that in the past we would tend to attack institutionalized, the laws separate people into these categories types of thing, and it becomes, I think, a lot more difficult in the current age where, on paper at least there is de jure equality between sexes, between races.
Well, in fact, on paper, what we have is de jure inequality in favor of the groups that say they're being mistreated.
Well, sometimes that too.
Yeah, not just sometimes.
Yeah.
If you are on any job in America these days, you're aware, like, if you are a member of the allegedly oppressed group, then you can basically speak your mind and not worry about it very much. Yeah. On the other hand, if you are a member of the allegedly oppressed group, you better watch your back, because you can get fired just for going and saying what you think. And again, all of this is ultimately comes down to the government has created a system where you can sue someone for saying something that if you can sue someone for you can sue your employer if a fellow employee says something that offends women, but you basically cannot sue your employer for because a coworker said something that offended men.
Yeah. So, but I think what becomes difficult then is if you can't point to a law or a regulation or something that says, we put black people here, we put women here, whatever, down below. How do you quantify it? And then it becomes very difficult, I think, to debate those points, because you can talk about, well, women on average make less than men for doing the same jobs or whatever. But then there's all these other sort of factors, including choices that men and women make, that sort of end up producing this disparity.
Yeah. The only thing I disagree with there is I think that for the last 60 years, we basically had the standard of, if it weren't for unfairness, there would be equal outcomes in every area. I think this has been the tacit assumption, and it's one that people are very nervous to challenge because it makes you seem like a racist or a sexist just to say, I don't know, maybe not. Maybe if everyone was treated fairly, there would be very large group disparities. Why don't we just treat people fairly and see what happens? Right? Or alternately, you could say, let's go and take a look at whether in areas where no one is complaining about unfairness, whether we still have big disparities, and say, oh my God, we do. Right? There are, so like in the world of, literature, you'll see there's some nationalities that are very successful in literature, others that are not. Is it because there's some kind of a conspiracy to go and uplift Japanese literature over Taiwanese literature? It's like, look, maybe the Japanese just excel at literature. I know they definitely excel at manga. Right? They're like, other countries imitate their manga, but Japan just did it better. Right? It's not because there was someone who said, hey, let's all like Japanese manga just because it's Japanese and hate all other kinds of manga just because it's not. It's just the Japanese perform well. Right? And this is the kind of thing that happens routinely in the real world. There's just no such thing as any important measure where we have group equality. And yet, over time, it's true that as the other complaints have been solved and we don't see group equality, then people either have to admit, oh, we were wrong all along and fairness does not equal equality, or they have to say there must be hidden unfairness. There's unfairness everywhere, right? Which is, you say standard thing. You just keep raising the bar in order to avoid admitting that you were mistaken.
Well, one last question, so we're up against a deadline here. Why would you not want your daughter to become a feminist?
So yes, the title essay is called Don't Be a Feminist, a Letter to My Daughter. There's a few things that I say there. First of all, there are the benefits for yourself of just not feeling like a victim, of not feeling angry at other people. And so I say self-pity and antipathy. These are very destructive emotions. And despite all the claims of feminism that they are not encouraging them, I think it's very clear that they are generally encouraging them. Does not mean every single feminist encourages it, but that is by far the main trend. But secondly, I say, look, I mean, it's one thing to say the world is really unfair, but it isn't very constructive to feel oppressed, and that's true. But here's something else I say. It's not even true that you're oppressed. If we go and take a look at the actual claims about unfairness, they generally are not correct. The ways that society is allegedly treating women unfairly turn out, when you really look at it, usually it is not the case that women are being treated unfairly. In the other exceptions, we can also see, yes, women are treated more unfairly than men in some ways, but men are treated more unfairly than women in other ways. So basically, step one is you don't have a reason to feel sorry for yourself as a woman. And then second of all, even if you did, it's still not a constructive attitude, because it's going to mess up your life, and it's better to go and do the best that you can with what you have. Right. So, and like what I tell her there is, it's very important for you to treat other people justly, and making false accusations against others is just a very bad way to be a human being. So that's, I think that's basically how I ended, is say, look, even if you could get ahead by going and spinning lies against other people and saying men are mistreating me when they're not, don't. And if the only way to go and win is to be a jerk to other people, just lose. Daddy loves righteous losers more than I love